Thank you for joining the W3C meeting today. We've got a few things on the agenda. We want to talk about our proposed priorities for developing OpenActive specifications in 2025. We want to talk about OpenActive and OpenReferral UK. And then we've got a small piece of AOB around club data, I think, which are all topics that I know everyone on the call is interested in because I've talked to you all about them recently, which is always nice. Howard, do you want to talk about what the W3C group is a little bit?
Okay, briefly, it is the how we manage changes and developments and enhancements to the open active standards and specifications, and we're responsible for data standards, the guidance and tools, developing the kind of technical support and infrastructure around the standards, and also how we interact with other standards, which is the focus of today.
Cool, thank you. And the reason that's the focus for today is because ODI have had to focus our work on OpenActive in recent months. And that focus is all about making OpenActive more sustainable for the long term. The ODI team is focusing on exploring alternative funding sources and funding models for OpenActive. Mike and Stephen, I know you're both involved in the Communities Fund bid that we're writing. That's just one example of the work we're doing in that space. We're committed to maintaining the infrastructure in the long term, and a key part of that is maintaining the specifications. And through the work we've been doing over the last couple of years, we've identified that OpenActive can really support the increasing connection between sport and physical activity and health improvement. And kind of building on that, we know that we want to kind of finally nail this interoperability issue between OpenActive and OpenReferral. So actually having a pattern or a standardized way for people to use OpenActive and OpenReferral together would be, I think, really valuable, particularly in that health context. OpenActive includes a booking specification called Open Bookings. Those Open Bookings and OpenActive's opportunity specification are quite closely interrelated at the moment. We think there might be value in Open Bookings as a general purpose booking specification, i.e. it not being so quite tightly tied into OpenActive. So potentially using Open Booking with other standards like OpenReferral or even in other contexts. So we want to explore whether it's viable and desirable to decouple OpenActive and Open Booking. And that's also useful because it will help us learn more about Open Booking, because it's the one part of OpenActive where we're probably least well informed. So it's useful to look at Open Bookings and to explore what we could do with it and what the art of the possible is. And then finally, we know there is increasing interest in providing information to people about walking routes, but also, and we have a route specification that can be used to do that. It can also be used to describe cycling and aquatic routes, but I think the focus is very much on walking at the moment. And we know that from a public health point of view, getting people walking is one of the easiest ways of making people physically active. So it seems like a good time to come back and look at the work we've done on routes and to think about how we can improve that. But we also have heard quite a lot of discussion about improving data about accessibility, but also improving data about safeguarding. And I don't think we can get as far in the 5 months that we've got in terms of solving those problems, but certainly we can start to understand the requirements around accessibility and safeguarding in a bit more detail. So these are the kind of priorities that we have that we've built into our plan, our delivery plan for the next 5 or 6 months. And I guess what we need from the W3C is support and help in delivering these objectives. Would you add anything, Howard?
No, just if it had been a wider group to see if anyone had any alternatives, and what's not mentioned on those priorities is club data. So I guess we kind of want to have a conversation about how that fits.
Cool, thank you. So if we move on, do you want to talk a bit about the process we've?
I will. I mean, I'm not going to read it all out, but this is in the slides is a link to the specification development plan, and this process is repeated there. So this is basically how we develop standards in OpenActive, but more generally, it's kind of best practice. They're driven by community needs, or we recognize a gap in the existing standards, or there's a problem we're trying to solve. These usually are brought to the Adoption and Engagement Forum or to this group, or occasionally come from other sources. And those ideas are worked up into proposals, and we raise those as issues in the appropriate area of the specifications or standards on GitHub, because that allows us to have open discussions and conversations around the pros and cons of making a change, and to explore that. And then we'll work that up into an editor's draft, which is a proposed change to the specifications, and get that out there, hopefully get that's adopted, and then we'll have a period where we review, and if there are no great concerns, then that'll be added to the next release, a candidate release, and eventually, if no concerns or issues are reported, that will be made as an update to the final specifications, the final report, which is stored on the W3C site. That's basically how we've been developing the standards, and that's the process we're going to continue with in this piece of work. The reason it's the question's there because as part of our specification development plan, we said we would just take this moment to pause and assess if that process is working for us. So that's this moment really.
Okay. And then as part of the management of those specifications, every specification has an editor. And at the moment, I think we have some specifications in the OpenActive Armory that don't have editors. Now, those editors could be people from ODI, and indeed have been in the past. But actually, that role of editor can be held by anyone in the community. And the role of editor is essentially to manage the process of agreeing changes to specifications and documenting those in the documents. And I think we're missing editors for RPDE, the dataset API discovery, the open booking API, and the customer accounts API. And I guess if anyone is interested in being an editor for one of those specifications, we'd be really pleased to hear from you. I think what's quite nice about having independent editors is that they don't have any vested, well, they may have their own vested interest, but it means that the responsibility for OpenActive is a bit more devolved. And in theory, having independent editors should empower the community to contribute to the standards a bit more as well. So I think we will be interested in people who would be interested in being editors, contacting us, but also ODI can fill that role as a kind of interim step as well. Howard?
That's all. That's it. That's exactly what I would say. We will probably issue some more guidance around what it takes to be an editor. I think that's
Cool.
something we could
Can
do.
I just interject briefly, just to note that Stephen did actually have his hand up for the previous slide talking about the general W3C processes. So
Sorry, Stephen.
Is that sorry?
No, I thought I probably could just chip in, but it also felt a bit rude. I was just wondering, how does that process begin? How is it presented to the group, or is it yourselves? Is it just an email saying, we're thinking this, this, and this, and then it kind of gets built out into a proposal from there?
Yeah. So, have you seen the Club Finder capability issue that was raised on GitHub? That's an example, really. Basically, there's a template that can be used to raise an issue.
Okay.
And an issue basically is a proposal for change, isn't it? So, and we're basically asking that you set out the use case, the stakeholders, what kind of changes, any concerns you can see, or what the pros and cons, etc. Just to start a conversation really about where we might change the specifications.
I've just linked to that in the chat if you want to see the kind of general flow of those conversations as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Cool.
But again, email also is a good way to, we just want to start the conversation really. So if some things that are raised by email get converted into an issue and shared on Slack and often brought to this group as well, this call for discussion.
Cool. So in terms of our timeline for our immediate work, we're planning to start by focusing on OpenActive and OpenReferral. Our motivators for that are largely to do with the wider OpenActive project. We have some use cases where it'd be useful to have a more integrated set of OpenActive and OpenReferral data. We then plan to move on to thinking about how the open bookings issue and whether open booking and decoupling open booking is viable. And then after that, we plan to move on to, well, kind of in parallel to that really, and for a bit longer, we plan to move on to defining requirements around routes accessibility and safeguarding and reviewing what we already have in those spaces and working out how we can iterate them. But yeah, our initial focus is OpenActive and OpenReferral.
Which I've saved for later on because that's what
we save for later. Yeah. So just thinking about, I think I've talked to this already, talking about OpenActive and open booking. This is about analyzing existing relationship and dependencies. It's about evaluating any potential benefits or disbenefits of decoupling them. It's about proposing any modifications to the architecture to allow open booking to exist independently. And then it's presenting those recommendations to W3C and the steering committee. On requirements, I think we're aiming to have some initial workshops around routes, accessibility and safeguarding with stakeholders to gather understand their needs and their pain points. Gather those findings together and hold a second workshop to validate them. This workshop might turn into a working group, essentially, to look at these things. And then to make some recommendations on how we improve the data about these things in the database and present those back to the W3C and the AEF. And I think at that point, I'm going to hand over to Howard to talk in more detail about the open referral piece.
Excellent. So if you click on, please. This Mike will probably recognize this. I think I got this from one of the Horizon reports some time ago. So we have, as the last picture showed, there is an overlap between the kind of information that OpenActive and OpenReferral are sharing. It's usually an organization providing a service or providing an opportunity for sport or a physical activity. There's contact details, there might be a date and a time, etc. So there is, especially in the social prescribing world, there is a use case to bring that information together and make it available to, for example, social prescribers that are looking to connect people with a need with the services that will help them. And the simple picture there shows that if OpenActive data can be transformed, it can be aggregated together with OpenReferral, and then the existing tools, the existing service finders will be able to draw from that information and solve some of those problems. So if you want to move on, please. And oh, there we go. So that is actually a piece of work that's already been put into practice by London Sport. They have basically done that. Go back on. You're getting ahead now.
Sorry, I don't know what's happened there. Nothing's working.
There we go. So
There we go.
London Sport have already put this into practice, and in the slides there is a link to the output of that process where they've converted their open sessions data to an open referral format. But do you want to say a bit more, Stephen? Was that your work? Do you want to say a little bit more about
that? Yeah, can do. It's probably worth pointing out that at this point in time, that output is not compliant with the current open referral standard. That's primarily down to some changes that have been made to Open Referral, but we're hoping to resolve that in the next couple of weeks. But essentially, it's just a process of mapping what we had in Open Sessions as our publishing platform, and finding corresponding fields that work in Open Referral. There is a large element of hard coding values into those fields to pull it through and make it work, and it's populating a relatively small sector of Open Referrals. And then from the example on the other page, essentially no other part of that diagram exists, in terms of the aggregation and the front end search tool. So the feed is there, needs updating to be compliant. As far as I'm aware, no one is ingesting it, but it's available for people to do that. So we may not be aware if somebody is going off and pulling that out. And then I'm also not aware at the moment of a front end solution to search that data.
Okay, thank you for that. On the screen right now is the plan we have for the coming weeks to the end of March, which is to review. There's an excellent mapping again, which I think is probably one of Mike's early works from a couple of years ago, of the fields in OpenActive and the same in Open Referral, with notes around how well they marry up. Is that being, as it's from a few years ago, Mike, do you think that's possibly out of date with latest changes to Open Referral?
Possibly slightly. I mean, what we've done since a couple of years ago is better aligned with the international standard, which has meant a small amount of renaming and bringing into the international standard things we already had in the UK. So, I mean, to me, the ideal approach will be for Steve to do the work he's just described, and then somebody document that, because that will be an accurate update of the mappings. Perhaps I could also say, just with reference to that prior slide, the one with the diagram. Firstly, as Stephen says, there is no aggregator at the moment. Now, lots of work that is essentially an Open Referral issue once everything's in an Open Referral format. And there is some work going on in aggregators, and there certainly is a need for it within social prescribing and in general within local government linked workers, because they don't just want to recommend sports activities or social activities. Sometimes there's a mixture of things that help. Also, that arrow down the bottom indicates Open Referral is not trying to provide a booking system, nor does it even detail every instance. Like it might say this thing happens every Thursday evening, but it doesn't say this Thursday evening, this class is being run by this person. Those things are deliberately left to OpenActive, and hence the latest version 3, includes the facility for a link out to what might be an OpenActive source for that data. So these things need to be, and that probably wasn't in the original version. So I think, resources permitting, the ideal is for London Sport to do its work, and then that will get reflected in generally shared documentation.
Stephen?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you can send me over the document referenced in terms of mapping the fields, I'd be happy to look at that and update that against our work. And then just as we were talking about, it probably goes across several points, but the open booking standard, if Open Referrals doesn't have, it probably doesn't have a need for a booking standard, but as we say, like not everything in Open Referral is activity data. If open booking was decoupled, then it could essentially be a common module between the two standards. So that would be a benefit to decoupling open booking. You could make it workable as a booking module for Open Referral or OpenActive.
It could indeed. In fact, open referral often confuses people because we don't actually deal with referrals. We just deal with what people could be referred to. And having the facility to book as according to a general standard, is quite useful. There is government work going on with DfE to actually take the data and do a gov.uk type booking of family services. But I should say, the ideal is to be able to refer somebody who may then be booked. So it's a bit more complicated than just there's a slot here, I'm going to claim it. Sometimes it's self-booking or sometimes it's a referral. But the standard, I'm sure open booking has a more general use, and probably one that people, ideally, public sector type people and community sector people might pick up, rather than rely on it being funded by a payment from the booking.
But I guess that's where the standard really comes into its own. If you're going through a social prescriber and you're referred on to something, yes, the social prescriber may not book you on then and there, and there may be no payment required. But to be able to forward you on like a link or an option that has a lot of that open referral data into it when you pass it over to the bookings, I recommend, I don't know, this mental health group for you. Here's a link to it. And then at any such time in the future, you click on that link, and because the data is standardized from either OpenActive or Open Referral, it would populate with the right organization, the right location, and like just as an option. Like all of that does play a strong case into decoupling open bookings. And I will say I've not looked at the open booking standard. It's something I'll go away from, but that feels like a nice feature across the two standards, to be able to essentially utilize that like a module.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think one of the things we've heard a little bit from OpenActive implementers is where OpenActive is used in kind of physical activity referral, which is, I guess, a kind of social prescribing. There has been some frustration that referrers can't actually book people into activities. So they can say there, I don't know, there is a walking group on Wednesday, but the booking, there's a school of thought that says if there's a if the conversation was more, there's a walking group on Wednesday and I've booked you a slot in it, people would be more likely to attend the slot on the Wednesday. I don't think there's much research sitting behind that, but I just get a sense that some of the people involved in active partnerships and organisations like that would feel more confident that people would take part if they had a booking. So yeah, it's interesting.
There's always been that direction of that flow from OpenActive into Open Referral. And what you lose when you go that way is that timing, kind of bookable slot element. What you just said, Andrew, and for me, in my mind, it feels like the right thing, doesn't it? That if the GP or whatever says, "Oh, what you need is to go and do this," and here I can find the service quickly, and here's a slot, I've booked you on it. There's your prescription. Go on and go out and be healthy. It feels right, but if we go that way, you lose a bit of that timing element, and that journey gets a little bit more complicated. But I guess what I'm going roundabout saying is there any value in going the other way, taking services into an OpenActive format? Pause.
I think that
sorry, you go.
I was going to say, I think open referrals too wide to then push back into open active. You've got, because it starts crossing across a lot of branches of the standard, like facilities and which aren't quite facilities. It's because it isn't just activities. Like I always like to think of it more as like an AA group, or like I say, like a mental health circle, people sitting around where there might not be limited slots, but then that's got the relationship to it's held somewhere by an organization, which OpenActive doesn't have that robust of an organization. It kind of falls into the club standard there. So the organization side of OR is much more robust than OpenActive is. As is the, I would argue, as is the facilities, because like the OpenActive standard, like the facilities is going to be, changing rooms, lockers, things like that. You get a lot more in OR, particularly around accessibility and things like that. It's just a much wider standard.
Yeah, I think what's in my mind is that a lot of we get some suggestions for the OpenActive activity list, which stray into the more well-being kind of things rather than physical activity. So that was in my mind. But of course, I suppose, and what I've just suggested, it would require the open referral service providers to have the capability to have time slots and things like that, which I think there's probably an even bigger range of data and digital maturity in that world, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, they do have some, like there's some availability, like there's kind of office hours and things like that, like the facility is there. And I think longer term, you've just sparked an idea, Howard. We probably want to look at possibly I don't want to say limiting, but almost creating a subset of well-being activities that cross over into OR. So you're not going to be socially prescribed rock climbing, outdoor rock climbing, but you'll be socially prescribed, maybe like a Pilates session, and so because that could potentially help the filtering down of data going into OR, because if you just had everything in OpenActive going into it, it's a lot very, very quickly.
That's really interesting. What was I going to say? So one other point I think I'll make is the again, going back to some of the earlier Porism work, was around some things that could be added to OpenActive to make it more usable in a social prescribing world. Does that ring a bell, Mike? Do you still feel that's the case?
Not offhand. I'd have to look it up. I could find the report that we did for you along with Digital Gaps.
Yeah, one I'm thinking of. That's the one I'm thinking of. So it just, we won't go into details, but it felt like there were some elements that aren't covered in the OpenActive spec, which is already covers quite a lot of ground. But there were some things that could be added that would make it of more interest. So that's probably beyond the scope of this. What we're talking about right now is making a useful transformation of OpenActive into open referral services, so which essentially means stripping some of the date and time stuff and a bit of renaming and a restructuring.
So for me, I think the key bullet point on this slide is the bit about trialing approaches and evaluating performance and complexity, because I think we, based on this conversation, we know that we can take OpenActive data and we can transform it to the open referral specification, and we've seen that London Sport have done that effectively using the open sessions data. So we know that bit works, and we know that the spec might need, the mapping might need updating a bit because the open referral spec's changed. But I think what we don't know is the right way to do that. So OpenActive is predicated on this decentralized model where every activity provider chooses a data publisher, and the data publishers stand up a feed of data, and I think we have about 300 feeds of data of different types. So one model could be that we ask the data publishers to stand up an open referral feed, and you end up with 300 broadly similar open referral feeds coming from OpenActive booking providers, system providers. I guess the other model, which isn't a model that we have in OpenActive at the moment, is that you have, well, we have commercial aggregators, but it's an aggregation model. So an organization takes all of the OpenActive data into a central data store and then applies an open referral transforms it to open referral and provides an open referral service off the back of that data. So that's kind of a centralized model. And that feels quite similar to what London Sport have done already. And I know there's a bit of a pilot with that IMIN a few years ago using the IMIN pipe feed, but there were cost implications to that, of course, because IMIN's feed is commercial. And then there's probably some models in the middle of that. And I think what I would quite like to do is work out what the best pattern for doing this is, like the kind of what is the right architecture for this? Is it that decentralized model, or is it finding an aggregator who can provide a single open referral feed out of OpenActive? My head says it should be decentralized. My heart says it might just be easier to have a centralized offer, and I don't know which the right answer is. And I think working out that and trialing that could be really important over the next few months.
Stephen, raise hand up.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a lot of this as because it's existing data. So we've transformed OpenActive to open referrals because we had all of that existing data, and we can't go back out to our audience and say, please can you come on and add all of this information.
Yeah.
But we can add fields and things to our publishing platform with a view to support that, or we could look at an alternative publishing platform. Because just an approach to add to yours, Andrew, is you kind of go through as simplified a process as possible, and then at the end of it, based on the information that you've put in there, it tells you whether it's appropriate for OpenActive, open referrals, or both.
Yep.
Which is a new and separate approach, because that doesn't work for current publishers. But if new publishers were to appear in the market, then it would, and then you could look at that against, say, other standards as well. Like, I mean, I'm just gonna keep chirping up with like open club, but like the organization side of OR would support the clubs quite nicely. So you come onto a publishing platform and you decide what you want to put in there, because open referral will let you list a community center where various things happen. They don't have to be physical activities. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, a couple of points. If I can, sorry, I in Zoom I can't find how to raise my hand. Firstly on that point, I mean, the general approach we've taken in open referral is it's not necessarily up to the publisher to determine who the service is most appropriate for. And we always give the example of a choir being suitable for social isolation, although that's not the primary purpose. I quite warmed to the idea of us just flagging which activity types might be relevant for which audiences, in which case the publisher wouldn't have to do anything. There's some kind of intermediate filtering according to activity type. Regarding the model for bringing data together, we are undoubtedly in the local government world and the community sector world going to get the same services published by, say, adjacent councils.
Yep.
And hence we are looking for an open referral aggregator which brings together councils and then allows for some deduplication. So to me, the obvious model coming from OpenActive is to do that transformation of each feed first and then rely on an open referral aggregator and deduplicator, rather than put any burden on publishers or indeed try and aggregate open referral feeds unless you have a separate requirement. But whether or not you do the conversion from OpenActive to open referral before or after you aggregate is kind of up to OpenActive, but there is still a need for aggregation on the open referral side, and it's all going very slowly, but there is some embryonic work there, and I'd love to see an organization like London Sport or another commissioned to do that. But there's also, some speculative work going on in that area.
That's really interesting. Is there enough to go at there, Howard?
Absolutely. So we'll check in with Stephen, on their work to update their feed to the latest OI UK spec. I'll look again at the mappings. We'll share that link with Stephen as well.
We could potentially present as well on that. Any ideas of things that could be pulled from OR to supplement OA that we were talking about?
Yeah,
just present us some ideas, possibly.
Excellent. And then we'll make those, flesh out some of those ideas around, at least the options for central aggregation, the pros and cons of distributed approaches, deduplication and that challenge. And I'll start to write that up.
Cool, thank you. So that was OpenActive Open Referral. So then I think you wanted to talk about club finders briefly as well, and we've got the right people on the call to do this as well.
Yeah.
So that's
so Stephen flagged this as something he wanted to pick up, and so I was pleased to add it into AOB. So I'll just summarize where we've got to, or we felt we got to. We had a proposal for changes to the specifications was raised as an issue and set out the ideas, the drivers for it, and some options. But alongside that, London Sport had an exercise collecting club data. So I'll hand over to Stephen for the latest news.
Just muted myself then, and whenever I do, I can't click the button for ages. Yeah, sorry, don't quite know where to begin with it. So essentially, we had a project that I imagine most people on this call are aware of to map club data across London. We decided to do that in a way that would be more sustainable, essentially viewing it as an expansion of the current OpenActive standard, taking a lot of session fields and applying those at an organization level. We've adjusted our open sessions platform to then hold this data, and essentially because of the combination of data that we were given by local authorities, national governing bodies, and data that we already had in open sessions, we have around just over 15,000 organizations in there that are, some are just clubs, some are clubs that are publishing sessions and various grassroots activity providers and so on. We've got some ideas around how we maintain and manage that data long term, and how we reach out to people, and which kind of coincides with like kind of soft touch marketing to get people to publish their data. And then from that work, we've just had a lot of conversations around club finders, which I think every commercial entity in OpenActive has had. There's always been quite a resistance in the market. You will go out to a national governing body or a local authority. They don't really want a session finder. They want a club finder because it's far easier to manage and maintain. It's less data. It's easier to get people onboarded onto it. So yeah, it was just whether our work and the kind of work around that standard that we've done could be something that could be adopted into OpenActive, and then that would form something that would allow the market to kind of dictate what they want to build.
Clip on the next slide, Andrew. I think we just get it also, so that's the other side of the story, is that London Sport, we had the Paralympic Games and Everybody Moves were interested in boosting their offer from a club perspective. Darren, internally at the ODI, prototyped taking simple club data and turning it into an OpenActive style RPDA feed. So that we had we've got these options. I know if Nick was on the call, he would probably raise concerns about it being primary data and a worry about data quality over time, keeping those things maintained. Stephen mentioned how they would kind of plan to maintain that. I'm just going back to what Mike said. What about deduplication, Stephen? Is that something you came across?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
FC F.C Football Club. Yeah, so essentially, I mean, at our side, that's an ongoing process, and it's a relatively manual process. So we're in the process of building out a version 3 of Open Sessions, which we're hoping to get live in the next couple of months, and that will have I'll have kind of like more features for kind of applying for access to an existing organization and a club, which should hopefully reduce the amount of people kind of signing up again, like, oh, I couldn't, it told me the name was in use, so I just added a space or just added a dot. We're also feeding the data back, hoping to get it done in the next week or so, feeding the data that we've collected back to national governing bodies. And there's a process as well, because we found like quite a few things just don't have suitable details. So it's kind of like a one-off exercise. We'll go through Open Sessions. We did some deduping for the project that we completed. We'll go through again, clear all of that out. We'll go through, make sure that everything in Open Sessions is geocoded and mapped correctly. We'll then provide that data back to the NGBs, and we're giving them a facility to manage and maintain, update the data, and add new clubs. So a lot of the clubs are maintaining this. A lot of the NGBs and local authorities are just maintaining this in a spreadsheet. So we're hoping to provide sufficient tooling that they would use this instead. And then so, for example, they find out about a new club, they add it to the list. If it's already there, they can't add it to the list because the name exists. If they do add it to the list and then someone tries to sign up to Open Sessions to list at a later date, they would be able to go through a process to essentially apply for access. It's a very simple process. It's much easier if you've got an email address with the domain of the website in it, but we do this quite a lot on Open Sessions. Just people raise support tickets and we give them access back to theirs. But we're kind of hoping that will help solve the duplication side of things. So we've got like and this might be too nitty gritty for this call, but like kind of parent organisations. So let's say we got something from Badminton England, and we got some, and the same club exists in like Camden County Council. They both exist as a parent. One club entity tied to two parent organisations, and then we just we merge the data together. So maybe Camden had the phone number, but Badminton England had the email address. Now they'll both have it in theory, because at the moment we're only feeding this back to NGBs. And then there is also an option to potentially for NGBs feedback data that wasn't in theirs. So other badminton clubs, basketball clubs, things like that. So unaffiliated clubs. This kind of gets. That's not my decision to make, but from a technical perspective, we're working on these things with a view to help cover deduplication, the quality of the data. I mean, there's things that from what we've got here, we could put it in the feed, whether it was primary or secondary data. Whether somebody came onto Open Sessions and listed themselves, or whether we did a mass import. And then also, because this currently isn't in our standard, but like date last updated, something like that. We kind of figured we've got a year to figure this out from the original piece. But if you go to any of the NGBs that we got this data from a year from now, they will supply you with the same data because they are not doing these checks. So we're trying to provide enough systems, tools, platforms to do the checks, let them add and manage and edit the clubs, and hopefully create like a relatively good feed that could be published, and then other providers in the open active space could potentially publish their organization data as a feed, ready for someone to aggregate it and build like a national club finder.
It almost feels like there's a gap, doesn't there, in the kind of data architecture of sport and physical activity, and that there isn't some form of national database of sports clubs, essentially. And I know that you've kind of built that for London, but I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity for us to take this to Sport England as an idea for funding.
Alongside, Tim would remind me of the name of the HMRC kind of
they're called Community Amateur Sports Clubs. They publish a list of those, just like a kind of tax status that community groups and clubs can apply for. HMRC publish a list of those clubs on the government website.
That's one.
But that's not a complete list either, is it?
No, it's not. But these are things to bear in
mind.
The
ones that declare their earnings.
Ones that apply for that status. Plus, there's some issues with that data, in that there's some of the contacts that list themselves on there and the addresses that are listed on there are like personal contact details or personal home addresses for club secretaries or club chairs or whoever, rather than it being a club location or a club contact email.
So Andrew, there's also to consider the that was it UK Sport with their kind of work with NGBs piloting new approaches, digital kind of and data management.
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity to align or to pilot with them at least. I'm not sure what the action is right now. Oh, so that's what I want to ask you, Andrew. I suppose is the priority we attach to clubs when we'd outlined our earlier priorities, and it wasn't one of them. But it does feel like there's interest and an opportunity here.
Yeah, I think so. I'll have a think about that. I think, London Sport have done a lot of work here. We're looking for opportunities to work with London Sport to be much closer to London Sport. So maybe this falls under that heading from our point of view in terms of us managing our resource and using our grant appropriately. Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting area. But I'm thinking it almost feels like a product or a service rather than a piece of open data standards and infrastructure. So we'll have to think about that.
Well, because we have the outstanding issue, which is around, is there a slight modification to the guidance that surrounds the Open Active Opportunity Specification to allow or even endorse this kind of model? Because it's not prohibited by the current specification. It's just, it falls into a gap, I think.
So my gut feeling is if it's not prohibited by the current specification, then it's allowed. But I think what we need to do is be clearer with people about how to do it using the specification. So maybe we need we'd have to look at whether we needed to change the specifications. But I think what we might actually need to do is issue guidance to people on how to do this using the specification. So the specification might not change, but we tell people how to do this thing through guidance.
And that's been done by London Sports work.
But wouldn't it sit as like its own feed? So where we have like facilities, session series, event series, things like that, it would be clubs or organizations. So
yeah, I think potentially you could have a reference data set of clubs and organizations, in the same way that we have the activity list and the facility types list?
That those are the options that are set out in that link, Stephen. There's about 7 or 8 different ways of using the specs to convey club information. So one of them, like you say, is a different type of feed. So not session series, but club or organization. But there are other approaches, which we've spelled out there. So I'll pick up with you if give you a chance to have a look through that, and we can have a follow-up chat.
Cool. Okay. Let's leave clubs there.
And this one is just an announcement, really. So also in the slides, that is a link which will take you to another issue raising, and this is about how we include some things in the activity list. So we've had some submissions. I should let you tell this one, Tim. So we've had some submissions for some additions to the list, things like send activities, or low impact, just generic terms that low impact football, low impact walking. So we're trying to work out what's the best way of capturing these in the list. Is it to just add the term because it's going to make search easy? So if someone types low impact football, it will appear directly. Or do we recommend to data publishers to tag low impact as in a different way, so that the activity is football, but they're either in the category or in some of the accessibility support specs properties. We list these more general headings. So one of them there is whether dogs are allowed. Pups on sups was the activity that they wanted added to the list. The activity is stand-up paddleboarding. The tweak to that, if you like, is that dogs are allowed, or dogs are, it's with dogs. So we've raised it as an issue. We're inviting comments from data publishers, data consumers, and others with an interest to find that on GitHub and give us your thoughts.
Cool. Thank you, Howard.
And special thanks to Tom Marley, who has started the ball rolling with some comments on that.
Yeah, and then this slide just gives a few more examples, which I think you've just talked through. So, yeah.
Okay.
Cool, thank you. So I think that's broadly the end of the meeting. We're bang on time, which is nice. I think depending on the feedback we get on this call afterwards, and if you haven't been able to join the call but have watched the call, please do provide feedback to Howard and I on anything that you've heard. The future meeting topics will follow that kind of plan of looking at open referral, looking at decoupling OpenActive and open bookings, and then looking at those requirements for those other areas of accessibility, sustainability, etc. It sounds like the club data conversation is going to continue. Our next planned AEF meeting is on the 5th of March, and then the next planned W3C is on the 19th of March in 1 month's time. You can register as a member of the community group on the OpenActive website. That will guarantee that you get all of the invites and information about the calls. And the OpenActive Slack is there as ever for people to join and have conversations between meetings. So thank you to everyone for their time. I hope if you've watched it online, it hasn't been too tedious and you've got this far. And we'll see you again very soon. Thank you.
Cheers all.
Thanks everyone. Bye.